Before we get into today's topic, I have one question for you. Are you still painting your floors for 5S markings, things like that? Don't do that. Head over to mightylinetape.com/podcast, a great partner in safety. They've been with us from the beginning. They have some really good products that are going to get you out of a whole lot of time, material, and maintenance and upkeep. Their floor marking tape is second to none. It takes up easily, doesn't leave a sticky residue. They've got floor tape with beveled edges for forklift traffic, carts, things like that. So it really holds up well to that kind of traffic in your facility. They also can do custom floor signs. If you have a particular logo or a message, they can make that happen. Get a free sample and try it for yourself. Again, head over to mightylinetape.com/podcast. Tell them that we sent you. You will get a free sample to try out in your facility today. Again, mightylinetape.com/podcast. All right, we're here with Doug Pontsler, the chairman and managing director of the Center of Visual Expertise, or COVE. Now, we're going to get into what COVE is and talk about how safety pros can think and look at these concepts. And Doug, you're going to introduce us to all of this. But first, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with me today, Blaine. I'm really looking forward to it. I was in industry for 40 years with two Fortune 500 companies, Eaton Corporation and also Owens Corning. My background is actually, I was an accountant for about 4 years early in my career, but the rest of my time has been spent in various forms of operations. And most recently, I retired from Owens Corning as Vice President of Operations Sustainability and Environmental Health and Safety. And prior to that, with Owens Corning, I was Vice President of Global Sourcing. But it was, I would tell you, it was the last 9 years of my career with Owens Corning that I found maybe the most rewarding of all of those years, because it was involved in protecting and engaging our people and coming to work and being safe and able to go home at night or in the morning doing the sort of things they want to do. So, and then since retirement, I have joined with the Toledo Museum of Art, and I run an organization that was formed by the Toledo Museum of Art called COVE. And we are focused on the application of visual literacy, and we'll talk more about what that is, but the application of visual literacy to industrial and service applications with a focus on safety. And COVE is in its fifth year, and we've had good success being able to transfer what has been taught historically in art education, but applied to industrial application, beginning with safety.
Wow. So this is what interested me. I can't remember how I first stumbled across it. I don't know if it was LinkedIn, I think. And yeah, and there was a post where let's get into that. Let's kind of bottom line up front. This is using art. How do you explain this? Is it art history or art, like how?
Well, I think, we tend to describe it as art education, and for decades, if not centuries, art students, art appreciators, artists themselves have been taught, when they look at an image, how do they examine that image? How do they see detail? And that's important because it's important for all of us, because when we look at anything, we're really trying to draw meaning from it. In the case of art, what was the artist trying to convey, in this photograph or in this painting or in this sculpture? And it's the detail that leads us to that. So we're trying to extract meaning from what it is that we look at. The reality is that that's also what we do as in our personal lives. We're confronted with images all the time, maybe emojis most recently, but we're confronted with images all the time that we're trying to figure out what do they mean and what do we do as a result of that. And my interest in visual literacy back in my days at Owens Corning and safety really stemmed from something that I heard, sort of over and over again once an incident had occurred. Was it wasn't unusual to hear someone say, I've walked by that 1,000 times and I never saw it until the incident informed us, that particular hazard existed. And I was always puzzled by that in terms of why is it that we don't see the hazards that can impact people if they interact with them. And we can, if we saw the broom on the floor, or if we saw the wet spot on the floor, we certainly wouldn't then turn around and trip over it or slip. But why is it that we don't see that? And it was when I came across visual literacy that I started to understand that, we don't, as individuals, we don't necessarily see as well as we think we do. But there's ways we can improve that. And it's through the capabilities, the tools, the techniques of visual literacy that can help us be better at that.
Wow, that's interesting. So what have you learned through partnering with the museum, looking at, art education? Mm-hmm. What have you learned about, like we used to call that factory blindness. I call it the wallpaper effect. It's you just get used to that thing, whatever that thing is, just always being there, and you kind of walk by. Maybe you're distracted. And, I've done episodes on situational awareness, and we really tend to trend away from putting it all on the worker. Like, well, you should have seen that. And it's like, well, should that be brighter? Should there be a light on it? Should there be? So is there sort of this bridge, like from, like, we have to make things more obvious, right? We have to increase the ability of the workers to comprehend, or I'm sorry, to perceive that something is there. They have to perceive it. They have to notice it, right? What can we do for the workers then? What does COVE get into, and how can we learn as safety pros about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Blaine. And I think, without a doubt, we can always do things that highlight, we can do things that provide guidance, et cetera, in the workplace. But, the reality is that all things become so familiar that at times we just no longer see them. And I would, as an example, and we use this example in our workshops, if you have anything on your refrigerator at home, I would encourage you or your listeners to just think for a second without looking what's on your refrigerator. And for many people, even though we pass our refrigerator perhaps multiple times a day, I know, in fact, I open it too many times. I was going to say
probably more often than I care to admit.
But most people can remember, well, I think I've got some pictures, maybe a bill to pay, maybe there's a to-do list or some magnets. They can kind of remember in general what's there, but it has become so familiar to them that they no longer can really speak to the detail of what's on your refrigerator. The reality is, in the workplace, the same thing happens, that things become so familiar to us that we just no longer see them. Mm-hmm. Now, as you referenced earlier, we can do some things to highlight them. We can paint them red, we can create signage and everything else. But the reality is that neurologically, we don't see as well as what we think we do. Really? And it's just the way the brain functions. And I'm not talking about, whether we are, whether our eyesight's good or not, or whether we use glasses or don't use glasses. I'm talking about how we take in visual stimuli and then process it, in our brain. And our natural tendency when we look at something is we pay attention to some things that are familiar to us because of our experiences, our expectations, maybe even some biases that come into play. But we just simply don't see other things. And we can illustrate that by looking at a photograph together of a work environment or any environment and sharing, well, what did you see first? What did you see second? What did you see at all? And we'll find that people see things differently. This occurs primarily because we lack a process by which we look at something. And so the heart of visual literacy is really about, when we look at something like a work of art or a work environment, what is the process by which we're going to look at that environment? Do we begin with the perimeter and work our way to the interior? Do we look for contrast? Do we look at it from a different perspective? Do we use some of the elements of art education in order to be able to decompose what it is that we're looking at? What our practice has discovered is that once we begin to apply some process to being able to look at something, we just quite honestly see more and we make more observations. So that's the essence of what our work is all about, is number one, teaching people what visual literacy is and why it matters. And then most importantly, as we draw a more complete interpretation of what it is that we're looking at, how can we take better actions as a result of that?
Wow, that's interesting, because what's, and you've been there, you've done this, especially in your past at whether it was Owens Corning or somewhere else. We task workers, and these aren't seasoned safety professionals that have been formally trained and gone to school. And again, not saying anything about them or that anything about us, but we're formally trained in maybe incident investigation, how to conduct interviews, how to right. And then we've done hundreds of them, unfortunately, over our career. But then we'll go to an assembly worker or a fabricator or somebody that is performing a task in a process that we've hired, and we were like, hey, you're gonna now do inspections.
Yeah.
You've got a checklist of just look for these things, and it's like, yeah, but what am I looking at? How do I look at my area? Or 5S is a great example. Everybody knows about 5S. We roll out 5S, and we want them to do a 5S audit, housekeeping audit. So this concept of teaching them how to look at an area, like we would critique art, like there's a process, like contrast, color, like you said, what medium. That's incredible, because art is very subjective, right? But you can have some structure to how you step back, look at this art, and look at the details, right? Yeah. And how you can find those details.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Do you have success? Have you seen success in taking that approach? Like, you educate them on that process, and then they go through maybe doing inspections or audits or something like that.
Yeah.
What has been sort of that feedback or the gains you've seen?
Yeah, let me if I can pause on that, I'd like to comment on something that
Yes.
you said a little bit earlier. I think there's a couple realities in the workplace that we need to sort of face into and say that we can make a difference with this. I think the first one is that too often when someone does say, "I walked by that 1,000 times and I never saw it until the incident occurred," I think too many times we just accept that as individuals as, yeah, we get that, and, it happens to us too, and we kind of move on. There's ways we can tackle that and not allow that to just be an excuse for why an incident occurred. And one of those methods is certainly visual literacy. The second thing I would say is that if we think about what goes on in our organizations, sort of day in and day out, we're all assigned tasks to go complete, things to go do. It all begins with looking. I mean, if you're able-sighted and you're performing any sort of a task, you're going to go look at what it is that you need to do first. That's the very first thing that happens. We train people on how to execute the task, but if seeing and looking is the sort of step one, we ask the question, how many people have ever been taught a process in terms of how to look at something and really be able to see what's there? Yeah. And, in our workshops or presentations or whatever, we ask that question, maybe a hand or two will go up. And it's typically someone who has had some art education in their background. So they've been taught a structure to be able to look at something and see what's there. But most people don't. We just take it for granted that when we look at something, we really see what's there. Yet we prove it to ourselves day in and day out that we miss things that are right in front of us. So, that's sort of that connection to how this matters to the work that we do. In our case, a focus on safety, but you can think of it in terms of quality or maintenance or any other activity as well. Mm-hmm. Now, from an impact standpoint, excuse me, we have data that indicates that we can expect as much as 30% increase in the hazards that are identified or the risk that is quantified by the application of visual literacy. There's been pilots that have been conducted that give us that indication. And one of the things that is really critical here is to think about, we can talk about incident rates as things that have happened, and we certainly would expect over time that incident rates would go down. But we also realize that there's a number of factors that play into an incident rate as a lagging indicator.
Yeah.
If we're going to be proactive about our safety performance and protecting our people, then we have to be thinking more about what are the leading indicators in order to be able to accomplish that. And one of the leading indicators is our ability to identify hazards in advance of incidents or quantify a risk score that we can look at improving. And that's where we see the improvement in terms of how visual literacy contributes. We have one of our clients I was talking to a few months ago had seen a significant increase in the number of hazard IDs that were done proactively. And I asked him, why do you think that's the case? What aspect of visual literacy or anything else that you're doing, has contributed to that? His response was that through the visual literacy training, we actually gave our people permission to speak up. If we're going to train people on how to see, then we have to be prepared that they're going to respond to that with more things that they have seen. And I think that whole idea of we've given them permission to, in their case, to be able to speak up was a pretty powerful, endorsement, to what we can do and what we can accomplish.
Wow. So you said a couple of things there. Obviously, looking at injury illness rates, we're never going to get away from that. We have to look at those, but you're right. They're very lagging. There's a long tail, right? And I like to put things into two other buckets: leading indicators and then predictive measures or predictive methods. Mm-hmm. So there's leading indicators, but then there's something that's even deeper, and that is predictive measures, right? Mm-hmm. How predictive are we? Can we anticipate where the next incident's going to occur, or mm-hmm. the likelihood that we are going to have another incident in general? And you said, which was really interesting to me, you said identifying hazards. So to me, that's a leading indicator. Mm-hmm. Identifying hazards that cause the lagging, metrics that we hate looking at. Mm-hmm. So identifying those things that cause incidents. However, our ability to reliably identify hazards is something completely different. That's predictive to me. That's deeper than the leading indicator, because yes, the leading indicator is we have to identify hazards and report them, and then we could fix them before they cause us a loss, right? Mm-hmm. However, if we don't have as an organization the ability to do that, it's not very likely that leading indicator is going to, bear fruit. So I love that you go back a step and say, so now we have to prepare our people, teach, train, and practice to increase the likelihood that we are going to be able to see and report those hazards. And then, of course, whether it's you call it psychological safety or some other buzzword, we have to have a culture of reporting. We have to empower our workers to be able to speak up, because let's face it, our workers, they're working. So sometimes, and that's again, another example is, how many hazard reports have we had in the last quarter? That's lagging. Do workers, we have a policy and we do training, with the checklists to report hazards. But then again, the deeper than that would be leading. Deeper than that is, how easy is it for them to use that process? Are they working at their workstation? They have to go all the way across the plant to get a hazard card. We've digitized it, but there's only one kiosk. It's in the break room, and they don't really have time to step away because we track time on task. And so by the time they take their break, they've forgotten about that thing they want to report. Like, those are all predictive. Like, we can predict how likely it is we're going to get a lot of hazards reported, right? So I love that you got to think at that deep level. What are some other, like, give us an example. I know I don't want you to give away the farm, and but can you give us an example of what we were talking about when we say that there is a structure to how to look at something?
Yeah, I'll give you. Let me go back and make a comment about what you made too, because it's very, very good. I think one way to think about the output of this body of work is, think about the risk management process being fed by a funnel. And at the beginning of the funnel is our observations about what we see. So if we're not seeing the reality of our environment, then we can't feed the funnel as completely as what we could if we were seeing more things. So by definition, if we don't feed the funnel accurately and completely, our risk management process is going to be compromised.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we really emphasize is the idea that when we do a hazard hunt, when we do a hazard recognition process, a design for safety process, you name it, what we want to begin with is what's our observations. Then we can determine if those observations really represent a hazard, and then we can risk assess them to determine, how serious or what's the likelihood of that hazard actually causing harm. So we're all about, how many observations can we make? Because the more observations we make, then we have a better chance at that. In terms of, the process itself, the discipline of how we look at something, let me just share with you one of the tools that we teach. It's something that we have created. It's called Seeing the Whole Picture. Picture is an acronym, and the acronym really stands for, as we enter a work environment, as we look at a piece of equipment, as we work in our garage, how do we survey the environment in a way that we can be comfortable that we're seeing everything that we need to see. And so picture stands for, we begin with the perimeter and we work our way to the interior. That naturally forces us out of our normal way that we might look at something. We might normally look at bright colors. We might normally look at people. We might normally look at something that just dominates the environment, and we get fixated on that. By beginning with the perimeter and working our way to the interior, we force ourselves out of that automatic sort of way that we look at things. We look for contrast. Contrast is a wonderful thing to be able to tell us that something is unlike something else. Think about a clean white floor, and then there's an organic shape that's dark on that floor. Yeah. That could indicate, a potential slip trip, sort of fall, sort of situation. We then turn it upside down. We look at it from a different perspective. Too many times we might conduct our risk assessment. We might conduct our design for safety review or whatever process we're engaged in from just one point of view. We stand and we look at the piece of equipment and, we do our risk assessment, and we don't really go beyond that. We need to look at things from a different perspective to have comfort that we're seeing everything that we need to see. In our language, that's turn it upside down. And then we ask people to repeat, go through it again. We ask people to then, if they're working with a coworker, explain what you're seeing. Talk about your observations. If you're a lone worker, you just have to talk to yourself about it and say, okay, this is what I'm seeing. And often when we put voice to or words to what we're seeing, we discover that we have an opportunity to actually see more than maybe what we've already seen. So seeing the whole picture is one of the tools, the disciplines that I referred to in terms of how we can improve our visual acuity.
That's great. That's incredible. Yeah, you're making me think of, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I remember from school many years ago. um, oh gosh, it was a class I took. It was art appreciation. And you're making me think about, like, yeah, all the different things that you can look at to really have a deeper appreciation of the art. I mean, let's say it's a painting. I mean, sure, you can go, yeah, it's a tree. It's very realistic. Well, not all painters or artists paint photo like, paintings, right, where it's realistic.
Right.
But there are other things you can look at. So yeah, we would look at, like, what's the medium? And is it watercolor? Is it oil? Those types of things. But then also, um, contrast, color. How the artist used different colors
Mm-hmm.
to send a message, to paint this photo. But what's the background look like? That's you're really bringing back a lot of memories. um, and the other thing you reminded me of, especially with the perimeter to the interior, is, my firefighting days. You know, searching a room, like,
Yeah.
and this is the opposite, obviously, but we would have a face shield that was just blacked out, and we would have to do search and rescue in a room. And we start with the perimeter. We always have a hand on the perimeter. We work our way the perimeter, and we use our other arm or another object to determine what else is, moving our way in, but never losing sight of that perimeter. But there's a method to it. It was a very structured. You don't just go into a house and start wandering around looking for things. You have to methodically go through to make sure you've overturned everything. And that
Yeah.
when we come out, most of us, we could draw a map of that entire house without even having seen it, because of that structure of how to do
Yeah.
that. So I love this concept of getting back to vision. I love this. I can see most workers would grasp this concept, and it seems easy to remember and recall.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it sounds onerous to some extent when you describe it,
Mhm.
but in practice, it's very natural, and it's very easy to execute along with two other tools that we utilize as well.
Good.
I think the thing that allows the connection to the worker is these are experiences that we all have. I mean, we lay our car keys somewhere where we normally don't put them. And it can be on a counter right in front of us, and we don't see our car keys because they're
Yeah.
not where we expect them to be. So we all have these experiences where we just don't see something that's right in front of us, and sometimes, most of the time, it's not an issue, and that's why we have sort of the risk tolerance at times that we have.
Yeah.
But when it is an issue, it can be a big issue. So that's why I think the connection is easy for people, because they have life experiences that reinforce that this is something that has impacted them in a minor way or perhaps even a major way, throughout their life. The other thing we talk about, Blaine, is not only what we see, but also how we interpret what we see.
Right.
And we could spend the rest of the day talking about the interpretation side, because there's a lot of factors that come into play in terms of how the brain takes the visual stimuli and then determines what it means to us. And a big part of how the brain interprets the visual stimuli is based upon our experiences, based on our expectations, and based on our biases. So another part of the work that we do is developing an understanding about how that interpretation is impacted by those factors, and how we can be aware of that, so we can be cautionary to the interpretation that we've arrived at, and ways that we need to validate that we're really seeing the world for what it is.
Yeah, and because those first two things, right, the three parts of situational awareness, that we struggle with in the safety world, that's what we call it. Like, be aware of your surroundings. That
Mm-hmm.
don't do that. Watch out for that. Um, if we can help them with some tools, we can help them perceive things better. Also, physically, we could change the environment and do some things there. But also now we have training, something education we can provide to help them perceive things, and then work on how to interpret them appropriately. A lot of folks, you're right. I use the electrician story. An electrician that works on something live, and you're like, hey, is that off? And they're like, nah, man, it's just 120 volts. I'm like, well, it's just 120 volts. You've got to, and like they've become numb to it, right? So even though they perceive it, their interpretation of it has changed over time, because I don't actually touch that one wire. I bend it out of the way, and I'm like, yeah, but so their interpretation has changed. Therefore, the third element is projection. I got to be able to project what could happen. That changed. They changed the projection. Well, that can't happen. Why? Well, because I've been doing this for 20 years and I've not been killed once. So that's a bias too, because based on their experience, nothing happened yesterday, therefore that changes my ability to project what could happen. That influences it. So I love that this is an example of a tool, so a way we can kind of help change those, and influence how they perceive and interpret, and therefore we get to really what we're after is, this could harm, if not me, somebody else. I'm going to say something. I'm going to report it.
I think the other thing that's so powerful is this is something that applies not only to us in our workplace, but it applies to us in our lives. Mm-hmm. And the statistics as well as I do. For many people, the safest part of their day is actually when they're in the workplace.
At work, yes.
Yeah, because they could be 7 to 8 times more likely to be injured, outside of the workplace. Yep. And other than maybe it's not a workman's comp claim, the impact is still the same to the company if it's in the workplace or out, because you don't have access to the employee any longer if it's a serious enough, sort of incident. So, the skills that we teach, through our work at COVE, we teach it in application to the workplace, but it applies in your garage, it applies in your basement, it applies in your yard. And I think most mature companies that are really focused on the well-being, of their employees and their contractors and their customers, et cetera, they want to be able to provide solutions that help not only in the workplace, but also at home.
That's great. I've found myself using a lot of stuff I've learned over the years at home. And when you were talking about the car keys thing, that's probably the most common example. Or of course, with my son, it's his AirPods, right? His AirPod case. He's losing it all the time. Now we can do the Find My AirPod thing. We have technology to help, but I remember applying the same logic. I'm like, okay, stop, right? When did you last have it? Well, I had it when I came home. I'm like, okay, so you came through the front door? Yes. Let's go to the front door. Which way did you go? Did you go through the dining room into the kitchen, or did you go right into the family room? Did you walk? Where did you walk? Let's retrace it. There's a method. People get frantic. They're like, I can't find my keys. And they just start like looking randomly, and they don't have a way. And then I've seen my son actually look in the same place 2 or 3 times. I'm like, you already looked there. I did? Yes. It's because you don't have a process to follow. And that structure, that also helps with anxiety too. I mean, yeah, he still needs to find his AirPods because he can't live without those. But because I don't want to listen to those TikTok videos. And but it helps when you have a method to go about doing this stuff, right? So I love that you can use that at home. Now, COVE, so this is my next question, right? We're going to have links to the website and all that good stuff, which is awesome. But how do you do the training? Is this virtual, remote? Is it online? Is it in person? How does it work?
Yeah, great question. Let me talk pre-COVID, and then we'll talk about COVID, and then we'll talk about post-COVID, if there is such a thing. But our primary method of being able to teach is live workshops.
Yeah.
And what we do is we conduct those workshops, preferably in a museum. Most of our workshops are conducted at the Toledo Museum of Art, but we've gone to other museums as well to conduct workshops too. And the reason that we like using a museum is there's a couple aspects of that. Number one, sort of the intellectual property component of what it is that we teach is grounded in art education.
Yeah.
So it makes it kind of impactful to be able to actually use art in order to be able to teach the principles. So therefore, a 2-day workshop, which is our standard Foundations of Visual Literacy workshop, we spend about half of our time in the classroom. We spend about half of our time in the galleries using works of art in order to be able to teach the principles. That alone makes it unique. It makes it fun. It makes it different. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the last time you surveyed anyone on safety training in general. Those tend to be 3 attributes that don't necessarily show up a lot. So
yeah, you don't even see those on a survey.
So we love teaching the workshops in art museums so that we have the ability to be able to leverage that. We also, in a workshop, we transition, though, from using art to teach the principles to using industrial examples to teach the application. So you'll begin working with works of art, but by the time we finish, you're looking at an industrial, either photographs or videos, and we teach applying the tools in an industrial sense as well. So the 2-day live workshop is sort of our foundations training for someone to leave the training and being able to understand what visual literacy is, why it matters, what are the tools, how do I apply them. So that's the outcome of the 2-day workshop. During COVID, we shifted pretty quickly to doing that work virtually. So we were conducting virtual workshops, and our virtual workshops, we can accommodate where we can accomplish the same learning outcomes. It's just the experience isn't the same.
Right.
And I don't think there's any of us that would dispute that the better experience is in a museum.
Right.
Because of the things that I said before, but we can achieve the learning outcomes by going virtual. We have seen a willingness for people to sort of return to the live, workshop environment. So we're migrating away from regular virtual workshops to just maybe a periodic one to accommodate people that aren't yet comfortable or able to travel. And we're back doing the live workshops. When an individual leaves a workshop, they're prepared to practice. They have the tools. They've had the education. They've had the application training. They can go out and they can go to work as an individual applying visual literacy. We also offer, however, for the purposes of company deployments, we have a license model and a train the trainer model. So we will license you our materials. We will train your trainers. We will provide you all the materials that are necessary to be able to do that. And you can set about, going and applying visual literacy within the organization. And you're able to tailor it to your particular application. We are finalizing a virtual on-demand module that is an introduction to visual literacy, and we'll be offering that by the end of the year. We also periodically we do webinars that address particular topics. That's all on our website, and we do offer a periodic 2-hour virtual introduction to visual literacy for those people that just need to know more about what this concept is about, before they make the commitment to engage, in 2 days of training. Yep. The last thing I'll say, Blaine, is that we conduct both open workshops where multiple company representatives come together and participate in a workshop. But we also conduct a significant amount of dedicated workshops, which are for one company. Mm-hmm. And typically in a dedicated workshop, what we do is actually tailor the application to that particular company's situation. So instead of looking at some generic, for example, industry images, we'll use their images in order to be able to teach the application side. So all that can be found on our website, and we love working with companies in all industries and at all levels of maturity.
Nice. Awesome. So we will definitely have links to the website in the show notes. I think a lot of the listeners to the podcast and viewers as well, I want to remind everybody that the full video will be on the Safety Pro Podcast community site. You will not need to join the community to watch this video. It's free for anybody to watch, so don't feel like you have to sign up or log in. The video is accessible without having to do that. But we will have the links in there as well. And I think a lot of folks, as I was going to say, a lot of folks that are listening or would be watching, especially safety pros, would be interested, especially the train-to-trainer piece. Let me ask you about that real quick. So let's say I go through the train-to-trainer and I license the materials. Is there an expectation as part of being a trainer is you then would, like I would then be expected to partner with a museum to, like, let's say hypothetically, the closest one to me, I think, is the Dayton Art Institute, just north of me in Dayton. And it's been several years since I've been there. And I know Cincinnati as well has one. I'm between Dayton and Cincy. So I would reach out to them. Are there a list of contacts? Do you have a network, something going with these art institutes across the country?
That's a great question, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to clarify this.
Yeah.
In the train-the-trainer model, the most of what companies are looking for is they're not looking to be able to give the worker the full 2-day foundations training. They're looking for the opportunity to be able to train the principles and the tools in their work environment. So the train-the-trainer is really designed for me at my particular location to go out and train my workforce on the tools, etc. I, as a trainer, have gone through foundations. I, as a trainer, have gone through the train-the-trainer training, but I don't need to train everybody to that extent in order to be able to apply the tools.
I see. So going to a museum is not part of, or is that part of the training? That's what so if I go through the train-to-trainer and then I want to train some workers on the principles on how to do this, right? To get the outcome, the learning outcomes we desire.
Yeah.
Is part of the curriculum for them as learners, trainees, not would-be trainers, is part of the expectation is I go to a museum with them and take them there, or is it just inside my organization? I train them about the principles and I use images and materials.
We have designed the program so you don't have to go to a museum.
Okay, there you go. Right. Although that would be fun.
And it doesn't preempt someone who is trained as a trainer to say, "Hey, I'm gonna take the Introduction to Visual Literacy module and I'm going to go to a museum and I'm going to do it there." Anyone can take their sort of the personal initiative to do that. It's not designed to require that.
Awesome. That's great. Oh, I can imagine a lot of safety professionals would be interested in that train-to-trainer piece there because, we're always, like I said at the beginning, we're always looking for new ways to increase our workers' ability to perceive, that is to recognize, to see, right, and take in that, and to actually, process, what does this mean, right, and interpret that to get to what we're really after is recognize, project, oh, this is what could happen, and this is a hazard. This is something that's not really that big of an issue, and then take action and report. So that's incredible. Awesome. So let me ask you just personally, COVID, coming out of COVID, have you traveled more recently or engaged, on sites or going to other cities? I know you do a lot up in Toledo, but have you been busier now? Hopefully.
Certainly. Yeah, we really have. I mean, a lot of the, the conferences that we speak at have returned to in person, although attendance certainly isn't what it was prior to COVID. Right. So we've been out speaking more. We've been, since March, we've done 3 dedicated workshops for individual companies and have a number that's on the calendar currently. So yeah, we're definitely seeing things begin to pick up, and
That's good.
I'm hopeful that that trend certainly continues. I think there is a reality that companies are still in general, and I'm sure you see that as well.
Yep.
While COVID continues to be a health concern at some stage, companies have also captured a significant amount of savings that they had to redeploy into COVID investment in many cases, but by not traveling. So to think that the travel budgets have just, are beginning to return to what they were before the COVID is probably not a very realistic perspective. But it's been great to be
we've lost. Yeah, and for as a safety professional, we've really lost that. I would say we've definitely had to rethink our approach, and we have to use the tools that we have available, right? But in person, being able to do a lot of these things, much more effective. Yeah. Absolutely, hands down. And like to your point, just the experience of getting together, talking, and being able to answer questions. There's just something powerful being in front of people or being physically present at a place versus doing this, right, where we're doing online and showing a photo. It's just different. And so, we're slowly getting back to that. So I'm glad to hear that you're still getting out there and staying active. That's great.
We'll be out in San Diego in September at the National Safety Congress speaking. We didn't do that last year, as a result of COVID. So
I'll be there as well. I'll be there. So we're going to have to meet up. We're planning a meetup, by the way, for podcast folks to like sometime after, I don't know, we'll go somewhere for dinner or something. But I'll have to connect with you and check out so you're going to be presenting at one of these sessions.
Yes. Yeah. I think on Tuesday, perhaps. So.
Oh, that's great. So everybody listening and watching, if you're going to the National Safety Council, the conference in San Diego in September, be sure to check Doug out. So do you do a little opening comedy act, magic maybe, or is it?
No, we don't. We're busy enough trying to cram into a 50-minute presentation all that we have the potential to talk about. So,
well, that's all right. I don't do that either. So, all right. Well, Doug, hey, it's been a pleasure. I'm really glad we finally got a chance to connect. I'm going to put the notes together and get all the links, the necessary links. And once again, Doug, the COVE. I'm just going to say COVE. It's the obviously it's the Center of Visual Expertise, right? It's
right. Correct. You got it.
It sounds very the Center for it sounds very Ivy League-ish, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it sounds very like, wow, I went to the Center of Visual Excellence and I got my degree. That's what you should do. You should give people degrees. All right, I will have everything up and running. And look, it was a pleasure, and we definitely have to connect in September in sunny San Diego when we head out there.
Sounds great, Blaine. Look forward to it.
Thanks, Doug.